What is going on, good people of the ether? Welcome to the Bitchuation Room podcast. Once again, here we are. How are you? I'm fine. Mercury is out of retrograde and everything should be smooth sailing. So call your ex and you will not get trapped. Okay? All right. Have we settled that? Tight. We've got such a good show today. We have former Border Patrol officer turned whistleblower turned activist and author Jenn Budd joining me for the entire show. That's right. It's too good of an interview to cut short. She's too big of a get. I'm too excited about the things we're going to get to, talking about immigration policy, but from the NAFTA era through now the Biden era. And how much has changed? Not enough. That's really what is the summation of it all. But I'm very, very curious as to what Jenn thinks about current Biden policies. There's an excellent article that came out from a former Biden staffer who tried to advocate for change inside of the administration in this last year and has since left. And so we'll get into all of that. But if you're here, make sure you're liking that like button with your little clicky poos. And make sure you are giving this podcast 5 stars on iTunes. That is how people discover this show. All right. And everyone's on iTunes now because we've all left Spotify behind. Except if you're on Spotify, that's cool too. Who am I to judge? So anyway, if you're on Twitch, thank you so much for being here. If you haven't noticed, if you could tell, this is also a pre-recorded interview. So for all you amazing folks, please keep your comments coming. Keep the chatter going. I love it. I may be in the chat myself, the future Francesca, the one who's won the lottery and just married Michael Fassbender. But so still keep the super chats coming. Still keep the love coming because this interview is going to be good, y'all. Before I get to it, however, I do want to plug once again the live show in Brooklyn, New York. That's right. Thursday, March 10th at the Bell House. You can get tickets by going to bitchuationroom.com. Bitchuationroom.com for all of your ticket needs. We got general admission. We got VIP if you want to come hang with me afterwards. Also, it's a ticketed virtual event. So if you are nowhere near New York, come hang virtually. I will be reading comments live at that show. So get your tickets, come hang. Sam Cedar's going to be there. Comedian Matt Lieb, Tiffany Caban, council member, just dope all around. And if you're a patron, you get to watch that show for free. And you become a patron, patreon.com/bitchuationroom for all of your needs and specifically bonus content. Every single episode, we give 10 to 15 minutes of bonus content. So if you've been missing out on extra stories, you know why. You got to get up on this. This show is not sponsored by anybody. And guess what? It is ad-free at the moment. ATM. And so straight up, every single one of y'all's subscriptions, every single one of y'all's support, all of the tips, you can tip the show, Venmo, TBR-Live, Cash App, TBR Live. That means the world to me. You have no idea. We are a small, struggling, but full of love podcast. I don't know. I sound like a family. It's like a weird 80s sitcom. Maybe we are. Maybe I'll pitch this show. The podcast that loved too much. Okay, I'm done. And let's get into it. So my next guest, she was a former senior Border Patrol agent and became a whistleblower and then an activist. And this was about 20 years ago. And man, she is still at it. She's got a book to be released in June called Against the Wall. Please welcome Jenn Budd.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
So good to have you. Thank you for answering the call, the Frantifa signal. I was like, please, Jenn. I have been following your work for a while now, and I'm really, really lucky to get you on. I know you're in high demand because, let's be real, Jenn, there's not a lot of former Border Patrol speaking out about their time. Like, no, but I'm serious about this. Like, why is that, right? I mean, people, are we talking strict NDAs? You left a while ago. What's happening?
In some instances, there are strict NDAs depending on what the agents get involved with. And then I think for many agents, obviously, many of them agree with the policies and what they're doing, and they're fine with that. And then for others who don't agree with it and we're able to get out, it's the last thing they want to talk about. And for others who don't agree with it but stay in because they don't have other opportunities or education that would allow them to make that amount of money and have that status, basically their whole lives are this Border Patrol thing, and all the pictures and badges and awards and stuff that they have on the wall. It would take an awful lot for them to critically look at themselves and their actions and come out against and say the truth. But there are a few.
Have you ever been contacted by Border Patrol former or current who are sort of commend you or reach out to you or vice versa, hate on you?
Yeah, a lot of times. Obviously the hate stuff is fairly prevalent, but there are many who have retired. They call it the old patrol, and that was what I was a part of. So before 9/11 is called the old patrol. And it's not to say that the old patrol wasn't racist or brutal. It was, but it certainly wasn't at the level that we see today, where agents are proud to take children away from asylum-seeking families, and babies dying in their processing centers don't seem to bother them. And so I have a lot of these older Border Patrol agents contact me and say, I'm just disgusted with what the agency has become. So there is that too.
Well, we'll get into that. But first, you were with Border Patrol for 6 years, 95 to 2001. Just talk about where you were stationed, typical day on the job, and when did it start to turn for you?
Well, I was stationed in Campo, California. That's the furthest east station, or at least at the time it was the furthest east station in San Diego County. So that would be San Diego Sector Border Patrol. And it's basically the mountains up before it drops down to the desert, the actual, what most people think of desert, of the dry sand and everything. So it's called high desert. And a typical day was going out and hiking, either answering sensors and tracking people by their footprints through the mountains and through the snow sometimes, and through the 100-degree temperatures on other times. We had a checkpoint. So I've worked checkpoint duty and basically just doing that and hiking all day long and trying to find the groups that were crossing. And sometimes they were drug smugglers and sometimes they were people. So
yeah. And generally, who did you most apprehend? Like, what kinds of folks were you apprehending back in that day?
Back in that day, it was mostly single Mexican men looking for work. This was just as the border wall had begun. And I think it was just kind of getting out. So back then, Campo Station had from Tecate, California, all the way east out to Boulevard, California. That's about 32 linear miles of border. And then everywhere north up into the mountains. And most of the people I met were just people looking to come and do a little bit of work and send money back home and go back home. And today it's, obviously it's changed quite a bit. But I think back then we had about 6,000 agents, and we had roughly the same amount of apprehensions that they had this last year that they're all whining and crying about.
Damn. And yeah, we will get to how it's
Bunch of
grown
babies.
exponentially. I mean, it's interesting because I visited the border and I did a piece for AJ Plus at the time, which was like, what you need to know about the US Mexico border. Didn't do that well when it first came out. Then Trump gets elected and it just like exploded and people like, what do I need to know? Good God.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that what people obviously misunderstand and what especially the far right loves to fearmonger around is the number of violent criminals that are just pouring in through the border all the time. And instead it's people, looking for work, single parents, kids, obviously. What were you trained to do? And like, at what point did the work start to grate on you? I mean, why did you ultimately leave?
Well, I was trained to, back then we didn't have the terrorism mission that they have today. But we were trained to just basically encounter or find anybody or anything that was crossing between the ports of entry. So, I mean, a lot of people confuse CBP with the Border Patrol. CBP is more like the customs at the ports of entry. Border Patrol is in green, and they're in between the ports of entry. And so basically, whether that was drugs or that was people trying to cross without being inspected, back then it was administrative charge, and we didn't charge people criminally with entering the country between the ports of entry. We most certainly never charged asylum seekers because according to US and international asylum and refugee laws, that's not supposed to be considered as an illegal action when people are fleeing for their lives. So it was quite a bit different when I was an agent, for sure.
So if that
But
person was looking for work and you apprehended them, you would ultimately let them go? Or if they were seeking asylum, you would let them go? Or was that a detention and deportation situation back then?
back then, it was just a processing, and then you run their records, and if they are not coming back with any warrants or prior deportations, then we sent them back through with typically what's called a voluntary return. And then they would try again because there just really there wasn't enough worker programs, and there really was no immigration system to deal with the people who were coming that wanted to have work, just like there isn't today.
Yeah.
And so it's actually what we're seeing today again is instead of the demographics changed during the Bush and Obama years to more people coming for asylum, meaning that they want to stay here versus working and then going back to their countries. um, Basically, the United States government on both sides, Democrat and Republican, have refused to address the asylum issue with asylum officers. So what they're doing is they're trying to treat what is an asylum humanitarian claim with a law enforcement tool.
Yep.
And so they're using the wrong agencies, they're using the wrong policies to try and deal with the situation that we have down here on the border now.
Oh, yeah. And I do want to ask you about why you ultimately did leave, but maybe before that about, you've spoken a lot about the corruption in Border Patrol, even when you were working. What kind of corruption did you witness, or are you talking about?
Um, well, I mean, I think I would have to go back to the academy. For me, witnessing the corruption started when I was sexually assaulted by a classmate in the academy, and we had been warned by the females in the classes before us not to complain about sexual assaults and not to come forward with the instructors demanding sex from the female trainees and stuff. And so they covered that up. I basically really needed the job, like all the other women that joined, and so I kept my mouth shut. And I certainly didn't think it was systemic back then, like I know it to be now. And so I was just trying to keep a job and get out to California and start my life. To be honest with you, pay off my school loans. And um, in the field in Campo, I mean, I have witnessed agents, uh, haul off and smack a migrant for no reason, and I would report them. And I have witnessed the secret and illegal critical incident teams. Basically, they're cleanup crews in the Border Patrol. They're entirely illegal, and I've witnessed them stage scenes and cover up crimes. And so a lot of it too, honestly, was agents that I worked with every day that I knew were facing charges of domestic violence or facing charges of DUIs or facing charges of dating the women that they were arresting after hours all the time, and things like this. And they would be under investigation for a little while, but basically nothing ever happened to anybody. Everybody just kept their jobs. And it got to a point where I was sitting in muster one day, and which is the meeting you have before you go out into the field in law enforcement, and I just realized how unsafe I felt by the people surrounding me, wearing the same uniform I was wearing the same badge I was wearing, and how comfortable I felt out in the mountains by myself. And back in the day, I was a skinny little thing, barely 5'6", and yet I would catch a group of 40, 50 men, and I wasn't that afraid of them. I mean, you always have to watch yourself, but in the end, basically, I suffered at the hands more of fellow agents than I did any migrants that I ever apprehended. So,
Damn, that is. I mean, that is it right there. You're more afraid of the people within your own ranks than you are supposedly all the criminals coming across the border, as we were constantly told. And I really appreciate you speaking up about that, that aspect that's so painful in terms of the amount of rape culture that exists in Border Patrol, but then also obviously we know that exists in the military. When it comes to the things that you were just, so I mean, so you're there and you're like, I'm done. You're like, I can't do this anymore. You
yeah.
after your did you feel sort of upset with your own self and sort of the things that you were made to do or the ways that you treated migrants as well?
So it towards the end of my career, I had been promoted to a senior patrol agent, which is a rank that doesn't exist anymore. But I had done a detail in Indio, California for a month, and I had experienced what I would call it the most deadly month of my career, the most bodies and just the horrible things that I saw. And I said, I got to get out of the field. And I found myself becoming angry, and I would say yelling, and perhaps a little more heavy-handed. Sorry, um, were some of the migrants I was arresting, and I realized I needed to get out of the field. And it wasn't the migrants that I was mad at; it was the being put in these situations and the policies that were creating all the death that we saw out in Campo and agents still see today. And it was just getting to be too much for me. And so I went into sector intelligence, and that's where I discovered that the boss, well, I had already known, but I decided to interview or investigate the boss of my station at Campo Station was the one organizing the smuggling of narcotics into San Diego County. And that's when they covered that up. And when I demanded to go to the FBI and DEA, I was ordered to work a midnight shift in a very junior position out on the border, and it was set up, and they shot at me, and I escaped, and I quit. So,
Wow.
yeah, I know
So
it's
when
ridiculous. Sometimes when I say it, I'm like, it just sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. So
that's
yeah,
terrifying. This
it was.
is
It
an
was.
agency that's terrified you since the moment you got in there. You did your
Mm-hmm.
job, you were loyal, and
Yeah.
then you saw something going on. I mean, specifically the cover up of drug smuggling or the
Mm-hmm.
allowance of it, and then of
Mm-hmm.
again more retribution. You were
Mm-hmm.
shot at by your own agents? What the fuck? That is That's awful. That's chilling.
And they
And what?
didn't answer the radio, and it was all that kind of like, I remember at the time I was like, this feels like Serpico or something,
Yeah.
That famous movie. And it was just, I think that part of it is like being from the South, growing up in the 70s and 80s, being white. And honestly, I really believed in you know, American exceptionalism. And I really believe the stuff that I was taught in the academy, that migrants are criminals and the majority of them are trying to come over here and this and that. And then just with my own eyes, I saw that this was just all lies. It's not to say that there aren't dangerous people coming across the border. There are some, but the vast majority are not. And we're just criminalizing them. And then to be a part of Operation Gatekeeper, which was the beginning of intentionally pushing migrants to the dangerous areas, which I worked, and having to witness that and be a part of that is something that I still deal with today and feel guilty about today. And it's something that I have to accept, and I have to face and have to learn about myself. So,
Yeah. And you mean the dangerous areas, like sort of either more deserted or maybe
hmm
more threats on their life, more difficult to
hmm
cross, that kind of thing.
I think most Americans don't understand. I think they see, the ports of entry, like at San Diego or in El Paso or Tucson, and they think, yeah, they're just jumping over the fence and running into the city.
Right.
And it's not that. I mean, it's can be days and days of walking through desert, and there are tens of thousands of bodies left out there by the policies that I used to enforce.
Yeah. I I did actually some work for one of my Nat Geo shows, and there's, you know, I remember we were looking at like actually skeletons of human remains of
hmm
people who'd been found on the U.S. Mexico border that, Border Patrol or ICE or whomever just kind of like, oh, not our problem, because you get to that point of such dehumanization. Um, did it feel ridiculous to you to be enforcing such a draconian policy when, like, those in power, politicians, anyone who could do anything about, like, immigration, whether it's, creating more work visas and programs to helping
hmm
quell violence in the countries where people are seeking asylum from? Did that feel just futile? Or, like, what was your reaction and thoughts about, you know, the things out of your control, the politics going on above you?
I think I think it's the same as in any job when you first get in. Maybe you take some training or you take some classes, and then you get to actually do the job, and it's a little different than what your training and stuff was, and you kind of don't understand what's going on. So it takes a while to understand that, and certainly in San Diego County and in Campo, when I first got out there is when the first wall started to go up from the Clinton administration. And so that took a while. It took a while for my Spanish to get decent enough at the time to understand what was going on. And I think one of the main benefits of being sent to Campo was that it was such a small station. We had very few agents. At the time, I was the only woman at the station, and you worked by yourself. And so I spent many hours sitting on the top of a mountain waiting for somebody to come with a van to help me, get the groups down. And you start to talk
Mm.
and smoke cigarettes and chat about things, and you start to learn who the people are that you're arresting every day. And so I think that at first I was like, well, they must know more than I do. I don't know why we don't have more workers permits or why we don't have this program. It doesn't make sense. And at some point, I think around year 4, I started to be like, this is ridiculous. What we're doing is ridiculous. And I don't understand why we're okay with it. I mean, the whole idea behind the wall in pushing people out to dangerous territories was that it would deter other migrants from coming and crossing illegally. But in order for that to actually happen, that means that our government realized that for that deterrence to occur, thousands of migrants would have to die to set the example for the next migrants coming to say, oh, it's too dangerous, let's not go. But even though that they have set the example and tens of thousands have died, it hasn't deterred anybody from crossing. So deterrence policies don't work. So I would say around year 4, I started, I would go through periods of where I'm doubting what I'm doing and thinking about the racism and seeing how the immigration laws are applied differently to different people from different countries, different color of skin, different religions. And so I slowly started to deal with that. A lot of times I would fall back into my, I guess what you kids say today, white privilege, and be like, well, it's illegal, they just shouldn't cross, and I'd stick with that for a while, and then I would come across, something horrible, and it would cause me to have to reevaluate, and I would go through this back and forth for a few years before I finally had enough.
I mean, and you say white privilege, but you've said even more strong things than that. I mean, you've felt. I remember you told my colleague Dina that from AJ Plus that you felt at times like a Nazi, and you've called Border Patrol white supremacist. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's not easy to say those things. It's not easy to sort of have that epiphany. So yeah, I guess I wanted to you mentioned something, I want to finish off with it and then go through almost more of the political trajectory and how
Right.
CBP and Border Patrol have morphed and changed. But you mentioned critical incident teams and we talked about corruption. Tell me what those teams did and what is happening now. I know you're involved in a particular case.
Well, critical incident teams, they have, at least in San Diego, the first one started in 1987, so that was before I came. Basically, the gist of Border Patrol enforcement is that Border Patrol agents do not have the authority to investigate themselves for use of force incidents.
Mhm.
So the Border Patrol didn't have its own internal affairs. And that is because Border Patrol authority is limited to 3 titles in United States Code, in legal code, which is immigration, narcotics, and customs issues.
Mhm.
So Border Patrol agents aren't allowed to investigate homicides. They're not allowed to investigate rapes. They're not, can they stop somebody from killing somebody? Yes, just like an ordinary citizen can. But that's not within their wheelhouse of their legal authority. And what the SET teams were started for or what they claim they were started for, was a liaison between local sheriffs and police departments, the FBI, and the Office of Inspector General, or other internal affairs federal agencies that would be investigating Border Patrol agents for use of force. So if I shot somebody and I said they threw a rock at me, the Border Patrol can't come out and investigate its own agents. They have to call either local authorities, and they also have to call federal authorities by law. And what they started here in San Diego was these SET teams where they picked specific agents and they had them go out, and they were the first to respond to incidences in most cases. And they would hold the scene for sometimes as long as days before notifying anybody. So they're getting their evidence together, they're getting their story straight, they're making sure the rocking looks really bad. And I'm not saying that all rockings are I'm not saying that, but in a lot of cases. And the specific case you're referring to is a 2010 Anastasio Hernandez Rojas case. This man was beaten to death by Border Patrol agents, CBP agents, and 2 ICE agents down at the San Ysidro port of entry here in San Diego, and it was caught on film. Border Patrol at the time said he wasn't handcuffed, but he was handcuffed behind his back. laying in the fetal position, and they beat him and they tased him to death. They claimed he jumped through the air and all this other stuff, and they lied. And what the SIT team did is they had the scene under former Chief Rodney Scott. They had the scene for 15 hours. They never even notified San Diego PD. It was media that notified San Diego PD. The Border Patrol SET team managed to get rid of the video evidence at the port. Luckily, there was other video evidence that people had gotten on their cell phones.
I do remember this. It was
horrifying. Horrible. A father of 5, had lived in San Diego off and on for 25 years, had a wife, and suddenly he's gone. And all of this was caused because Anastasio had been kicked by an agent when he was searching him. So you know how in the movies when they kick your feet out to separate your legs, when they say, you know, we're going to search you, and they kick your ankles out so they can search your leg. Well, Anastasio had a pin in his leg from a prior surgery, and it hurt, and he damaged it. And Anastasio was demanding that the Border Patrol take him to a doctor in the United States because he knew if he didn't do that, it would never be fixed. And being that he was undocumented and poor, he would probably not be able to work. He has a family of 5 to feed and a wife and this and that. And because he demanded his civil rights to see a doctor within the United States and file a complaint against this agent who hurt him, they said no, and they took him down to the port of entry and told him to go across, and he said, no, I need to go to the doctor. And so they taught him a lesson, is what they did to that man. And so these SET teams, from the very moment, are messing with the evidence. They give, CBP gives out orders over the radio. They look up and they see people videoing who happen to be going across, you know, the Mexican border back and forth.
Yeah.
And they say, go get those pictures and erase them and delete the videos and get rid of all the witnesses. And by the time San Diego PD ends up on the scene, almost everything's gone. And then the SET team is the one that sits in on every single interview of any witnesses and Border Patrol agents. And so they're sitting in while the investigation is happening. And they're the ones that committed the crime. They know what the investigation has on them. And so then, and they're calling back and forth. They have affidavits calling from people in OIG, people in CBP, internal affairs back in the day that said, yeah, we knew within hours what was going on. So they use the SIT teams not just to get rid of evidence, but to get a game plan for how to deal with the press.
So and these teams are and these teams are under what? Are they under DHS? Are they separate? What is they're secretive, we're unclear where funding, and they're federal agents.
The Congress doesn't even know they exist. Congress doesn't know they exist. I know some Border Patrol agents who've served 20 years, and they are more of the agents who don't like to, they like to, we call them station rats. So they like to do processing and stuff. They don't like to go out and get into shootings or get into fights and stuff. So they don't have experience of dealing with these teams. So I've known Border Patrol agents with 20 years in that don't know what they are. That's how secretive they are. The only government document I found online was the 2010 use of force manual that the attorneys for the Anastasio family got made public. And in that use of force manual, it says the first thing you do is you call these CIT teams, CIT teams, and you tell them before you tell anybody, you know, call anybody else. Number one, that's against the law. And so when they got that released, they got what's called a PERF report, which is made up of high-ranking former law enforcement officials, professionals, degree professionals that come together as a retired group of probably mostly white men, and they evaluate things like the Border Patrol and stuff like that. And they evaluated this use of force manual that the Border Patrol was using at the time they killed Anastasio. And they said, what is this sit team? You need to tell us what that is. We're not sure what it is or if it has the authority. Well, when the Border Patrol released the new use of force manual, it got rid of the mention of sit teams. There's no mention of sit teams. Nobody knows they exist, except, this is what kills me most of all, is the local sheriff's police departments, the FBI, OIG, the U.S. Attorney's Office, even the courts know that these units exist, but nobody's ever said, where's your authority to conduct these investigations? Police departments have to be given legal authority to investigate. Border Patrol has legal authority to investigate immigration, customs issues, and narcotics.
Yeah.
Where's your authority to do internal affairs investigations into use of force? They simply do not have it. And so everything that they have done since 1987, at least in San Diego sector, is illegal. Everything. Every single incident of death, every car wreck that they have been to has been done illegally.
Meanwhile, money just keeps on pouring in. I want to switch gears, and be respectful of your time here. We got a lot of ground to cover. You left in 2001, just at the time when, of course, thanks to 9/11 and the militarized response to it, there was a huge infusion of money to the border, and specifically the creation of DHS, which hadn't exist. The time you're talking about, yes, Operation Gatekeeper, that was started under Clinton, that was already, going the way of trampling human rights even more. But let's just look at the budget, right? Since 93, when current strategy of concentrated border enforcement was first rolled out along the U.S.-Mexico border, the annual budget of the Border Patrol increased more than tenfold, $363 million. This is until 2021, to nearly $4.9 billion. So $363 million to $4.9 billion now. Since 2003, the budget of CBP, right, with the sort of the more umbrella, which includes Border Patrol and operations at ports of entry, has also nearly tripled, rising from $5.9 billion in 2003 to $17.7 billion in 2021. That's this last year. $17.7 billion. Has it gotten better? Are there fewer deaths? Are people safer? I think we know the answer to that. It is interesting that, you were at a time where you saw the impacts, I think, more directly of things like NAFTA, right? Things like, people searching for work because of these trade deals that were really falling on the backs of specifically a lot of rural communities in Mexico, and folks who were out of work. So yeah, they're going to come across the border of the United States. Now we're in Bush years where the stakes rise dramatically. The formation of ICE. Talk about the the solidification of a very racist border policy. What's your understanding of the Bush years, I guess, before we get into the sort of Obama-Trump years? Any grand thoughts on that whole shift?
I think the Bush years, I think we can look at that as the beginnings of what we're seeing today, not just, the revelation of these sit teams, because obviously, I'm telling you that they were there before CBP and DHS came about. So what DHS and CBP did is they kind of operationalized the racism and the brutality, and what they were working towards is like they made illegal entry without inspection, instead of being an administrative charge like during my time, was now a criminal charge.
Yeah.
And you could see where they're looking to criminalize asylum seekers. And so because of NAFTA, there were a lot of factories being built in Mexico. And so what I saw at the end of my career was a a lot less people crossing. There were, when I first started, it was just wall to wall. As soon as you got on duty, you're just running and chasing groups. And then after that, when NAFTA started actually creating employment for Mexicans in their own home country, we saw less of that. We saw more people leaving the United States, and it was boring. It was really pretty boring out there in the field. You could go sometimes days without seeing anybody, and so I think what the Border Patrol, they had a lot of influence on CBP and how they would be organized. And they wanted to create CBP as more of a national police force. And back then, the guy in charge was Chief David Aguilar. And he ended up becoming like a deputy commissioner of CBP after he was chief of the Border Patrol. And what he wanted was for even like FBI and ATF and all of the other federal agencies to have to come to CBP and the Border Patrol for their intelligence. So fast forward now to today, when you see like the BLM protest and these other issues at the border going on, or you see what's going on or what went on during the Trump administration with the protests in Portland, Oregon. You see CBP drones being used. You see CBP officers being used. So what the Border Patrol and CBP did is quietly and secretly increased the authorities and the abilities of these agencies and made them more and more powerful.
Yeah, their jurisdictions are just so vast. I think that's what you're referring to. What's the mileage again? It's like more than, I don't know, it's like 400 miles or something within.
It's 100 miles from any land or sea barrier. So even Chicago is considered a border city. Detroit is a border city. So is Washington, D.C. and Portland. So that's why you're seeing a lot of this. I mean, when you go down to the border today, it doesn't feel like there are more agents, even though there are 3 times as many agents as when I was there, because they use more cameras and things. And apparently now they have robot dogs they're going to use. So
yes, this is the latest breaking news. Fun, Jen. See what you missed out on? Robot dogs. You could have that probably would be a better friend than I guess some of the people you had to work with. Yeah, so let's
what you see in the Bush years is you see these anti-immigrant hate groups bringing in policies and changing a lot of stuff as far as federal administration and ideas that anybody who crosses the border is a potential terrorist.
Yes.
And anybody who, and so that's the big overall picture is let's criminalize anybody who's coming across the southern border. Not necessarily always the northern border, not necessarily people who overstay their visas or people who look like me, but mostly Central Americans that are coming across the southern border, or Black, Haitians,
yes,
people
Black
from
migrants,
Cameroon.
migrant. Yes. Oh God, and I want to talk a little bit about that, but in case there was any question as to whether or not. Obviously there were some openings around immigration policy thanks to a lot of the work being done by immigrant rights organizers under the Obama years, with the passage of DACA, which I think was really huge and influential. And of course, the right has never forgiven, him for doing that. And let's remember he deported more migrants than at that point anyone had. So he was also known as the deporter in chief. So there's a mixed bag, but meanwhile, money continues to grow for CBP and for ICE and such. But under under Trump, you really see some of that corruption that we talked about initially. This was from 2020. So the Obama administration, during that administration, the cases of misconduct among border officials dropped steadily. But since 2017, when Trump took office, cases have reached a 5-year high, according to a recent internal Customs and Border Patrol reports. This is them looking into themselves, so you can only imagine it's probably higher than that. So what does that look like? Despite the efforts, with building the wall, etc., the effect of deterrence hasn't had, an impact the way they would like. So traffickers have paid millions of dollars to U.S. border agents to keep drugs and people flowing throughout Trump's time in office. This is from a Mexican woman who was in charge of smuggling operations in a drug cartel in El Paso, saying, quote, "We pay as much as $10,000 to a migra," so a border patrol officer, only to look the other way while we're using a tunnel to smuggle drugs and to tell us of new trends on surveillance. So how to make the robot dog heal. You just scratch right under here. You just scratch. But, there you have it. So it's like, okay, you increase the surveillance, but so long as you're not taking care of the corruption, in a world that you imagine the surveillance or militarism even worked in the first place,
right,
there's still the corruption where people are being paid to look the other way. $10,000. It's a pretty good paycheck. And there's a little bit more. There's some cases, right? So you've got a Border Patrol agent in Arizona being arrested on suspicion of drug trafficking with Mexican criminal organizations. The same month, a U.S. border agent was arrested in Juarez and accused of smuggling 30 rounds of ammunition. We've talked about on this show with Yohan Grillo about the amount of guns that are flowing down south through the border. And this was in September of 2020. 6 border agents were arrested on suspicion of stealing cocaine and marijuana from dealers to sell in the U.S. And that month, the CBP Laredo officer was arrested in connection with 4 murders and 1 kidnapping. Jen, it's gotten worse.
What's your problem, Francesca? You hate America.
Exactly. I must. That's the feeling I'm feeling. How does it, like, when Trump got elected and you're looking at it, the way he stoked all that violence and rhetoric around the border. I don't know. How was that for you as someone who's worked on the border?
I know as a woman from Alabama who grew up in the 70s what that was, and I knew obviously as a Border Patrol agent what the Border Patrol had been going to during these Bush years and Obama years, and from the rhetoric and what I saw, that's when they separated the children, when they announced they were separating the children, that was the first time I publicly came out and said, this, you guys have got to lay down your badges and guns. You can't do this. And of course, nobody cared, but I just felt like
we care.
Well, yeah. I felt like, I had gone on into the Border Patrol wanting to serve my country. At the same time, I wanted to be a civil rights attorney, believe it or not. And, didn't have any knowledge of the southern border. And I felt like I was in a place in my life personally where I felt like you need to stand up and do the right thing. You need to see, things, what's been going on, you understand how the system works, you understand why this is wrong. Maybe some agents don't know that this is wrong, but at least say something. You need to say something. And so I just felt like I couldn't stay quiet and live my life, that had nothing to do with immigration at the time, without saying, no, this is wrong. We cannot do this. What we're doing is, number one, our deterrence policies are genocidal. They just are. And that, and then just, that whole mess of taking children away from their parents. I just don't understand how agents could have done that. And people would say to me all the time, well, you've probably done that. And I'm like, no, we never did that. We never held people more than 3 or 4 hours for processing, and people did not die in our custody like they were dying in the Trump administration. And then the bragging about it on top of it and the laughing about it. It's just, there's no honor in that, and the Border Patrol motto is honor first. And it just threw me right back into it. And I think I just couldn't walk away. I just had to start talking and writing about it.
And that's when you did, correct? That's when you did start speaking out, was during the Trump years.
Yeah.
That's huge. And of course, like, I think that moment moved a lot of us. I think the specific cruelty and the ways that, you have, I think for me, what I started to learn in the Trump years was that, our strategy for stopping migrants is to be as bad, if not worse, than the narcos and the cartels and the gangs that these people are fleeing. That
Yeah.
that's all we're doing is just,
Yeah.
oh no, we can be just as bad, so you'll stay away.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, once you realize that, I mean, it's like, what are we even doing? All of this money that we're throwing at it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
I did want to actually speak out. I mean, speaks to that moment, and specifically some of the fallout from what ICE was doing in those days. I don't know if you guys remember Kirstjen Nielsen, good old DHS secretary, who was horribly chanted down while dining out. I think she was the one dining at a Mexican restaurant when the protesters accosted her. But
Yeah.
so ICE actually asked Kirstjen Nielsen to dissolve ICE. So remember, the whole
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stop ICE, abolish ICE. Yeah, ICE wants to be abolished. So this is
Mm-hmm.
more than a dozen U.S. Customs and or Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents signed a letter to Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen asking to eliminate ICE and shift its work to another bureau. So these are 19 ICE investigators who basically said in this letter that they are not able to do their work. So agents in the division work on crimes like drug trafficking, cyber crimes, and human smuggling. The rest of this article goes on to say basically they're like, look, we can't focus on actual crime or criminals
Mm-hmm.
because we are, we're an enforcement agency for anyone crossing the border, no matter if they're, a woman and children looking for work. And we're being unfairly demonized, at least, or fairly demonized. We're being demonized because because of this. And it's like, yeah, no shit, bud. Like you are and you
Yeah.
should be. But it's interesting that you have this call from inside the agency going, if you really want us to do our job or what we think our job is supposed to be, you need a separate entity, maybe go back to the way it was before 9/11 and stop criminalizing people who are simply crossing the border because they are not criminals. That is
I
not the
think
same.
that that's I think that that letter came from investigators within ICE who, as it said, were more working on these drug smuggling and trafficking of sex victims and so forth, and that kind of thing. And during the Trump years, what had happened is they were like, well, we heard this guy here is undocumented, go get him. And so they, then they ended up becoming that type of police force. And that's what people who worked in investigations and obviously doing sometimes very serious investigations, um, they don't want to be doing that. If they were doing that, then they would just become a border patrol agent. So
Right.
they don't want to do that. They want to actually put people in jail who are criminals, not go after mom and dad because they crossed in the 80s, to find jobs.
I mean, I want to ask about what we need to be doing, but that's our whole wrap up to bring us up to speed with where we're at now. I did want to mention the Biden administration and what's going on. There was a recent article that came out from a former staffer. This is a New Yorker article named Andrea Flores, who had been doing immigrant advocacy work from beforehand and was very exciting when she actually joined the National Security Council under Biden. Prestigious role. And she was specifically tasked, I think, with rolling back some of these Trump era policies.
Hmm.
We'll look at what those are. Sadly, though, she did leave recently. In the past fall, this article just came out this week. She left the administration and other high profile departures followed. According to 3 current and former administration officials, the resistance to easing Trump era restrictions came from the very top of the White House chain of command. Ron Klain, chief of staff, Susan Rice, head of domestic policy council, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor. Quote, none of them is an immigration expert, one of the officials told me. Quote, the immigration experts who were brought in, all those people like Andrea Flores, are not the ones controlling the policy direction. That should tell you something right there. The ones who are at the highest level are political people, i.e., whenever Republicans
Hmm.
make a big stink about the border and they go and they take pictures of that, these are the ones who are like, oh no, we must shift our policy based on how they're making us look bad.
Hmm.
Um, So a little bit more from what she tried to do and successfully did. So her first task was to, this is Andrea Flores again, one of the fulfill one of Biden's explicit promises on the campaign trail to end a policy called migrant protection protocols started under Trump, which had forced more than 60,000 migrants to wait in Mexico after they applied for asylum at the border. In effect, migrants who had fled violence and poverty in their home countries had become stuck in some of the most dangerous parts of Mexico, where criminals and extortionists targeted them with impunity. During the next 7 months, Flores orchestrated a process that allowed 13,000 migrants, many of whom had spent the better part of 2 years in makeshift encampments, to enter the U.S. And she says, or an administration official says, no one heard about it because it ran so smoothly. And another official said, this was how government was supposed to work. Andrea was in charge, and it was beautiful to watch. So it's like, cool, great, 13,000. That's not nobody. People were living in encampments. That's amazing. So then what happened? Well, the politicians, I guess, took over. And before she could finish the job, she was called off of it. I'm going to summarize this instead of reading it, but 2 Republican attorneys sued the Biden administration, and the Justice Department appealed, and Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, issued a memo laying out the case for why this policy should be terminated. But ultimately, a conservative Fifth Circuit judge court basically was like, no, you have to reinstate this policy because of this lawsuit. And Flores says that Biden basically complied. Like, it was like, okay, well, we tried, and she says, why launch it before you devise a new and creative housing solution for migrants? Why launch it before you have a case oversight mechanism? Like, why reinstate this policy? You could comply with the court potentially, but why not introduce a solution instead of just reinstating this awful policy that are currently has people, like we saw, Haitian migrants under bridges, in encampments, in really dangerous areas. So,
Do you want me to answer that?
Oh, please.
Because Democrats are just as bad and brutal on immigration as Republicans are. Yeah. Our first wall came under Carter back in the day.
Damn.
And then the first big wall that, we know of in our current time was created by Clinton. And then Obama was the deporter in chief. The deal is Democrats like to talk big game on immigration when they're running for office. And then when they get in office, they view people like Miss Flores, who knows a lot about immigration and a lot about how to bring in asylum seekers and run checks and make sure the country is safe, while at the same time being humane. They view her and other people like her as soft-hearted, bleeding liberals who want to bring in everybody, and that's not the case. So they have a bit of that all or nothing thinking that the Republicans do, of whether it's either open borders or closed borders. The fact of the matter is the Democrats will never be as brutal as the Republicans and the Border Patrol wants them to be, but they will continue to try and do it by giving them raises or doing what like Mayorkas did by going to the border and putting on a Border Patrol jacket with a badge and trying to look like he loves the Border Patrol. But the Border Patrol is not having it. And CBP is not having it. That's the problem that the Democrats have. So,
well, yeah, I mean, this is the same thing that they have on passing any basic policy, right? It's like, well, ultimately they don't believe in it, so there's that. And number 2, they're too busy giving concessions out to the far right and Republicans, like Joe Manchin or whomever, are like going and having photo ops to people who will never love them and will never get on board with them. Now, my question to you is, at this point, I've looked at what CBP has done and I'm like, this is an out of control entity. These guys are above the law. Not even their president can rein them in. And I feel like we saw that when Haitian migrants were whipped on horseback and the administration, no idea what to do about it.
That was completely out of control. I went down there from requests from some Haitian leaders to be there just to observe and watch that. And that's the feeling that I got, is that The Border Patrol helped create the situation of the Haitians under the bridge. They helped exasperate it. And at the same time, when former Chief Scott was told to resign by the Biden administration, that was seen as a big slap in the face to the Border Patrol to put Raul Ortiz. The Border Patrol agents don't respect Raul Ortiz, as you saw recently with where they were yelling at him. So the chief of the Border Patrol has lost all control of the Border Patrol right now. The Border Patrol is being run by the Border Patrol Union. And
Union.
they,
Oh, fun.
yeah,
I can only imagine a police union on steroids.
They are completely 100% devoted to Trump. And so all of these right-wing press announcements and the leaking of meetings between Mayorkas and agents and all this, that's all being orchestrated by the union. The union technically is illegal right now because before Trump left office, he designated them as a security agency. And I have to look at it, but under 5 USC 7112, if a law enforcement agency is designated as a security agency, they cannot have a bargaining unit. Trump also gave the Border Patrol Union, they used to have 18,000 hours a year collectively to work on union issues because all the union representatives are agents themselves.
Right.
Trump changed that to like 250,000 hours. So they are working to sabotage this administration, whether they agree with them or not. And everything you're seeing from the Haitians under the bridge to everything that we're seeing today going on, all this is being orchestrated by the union. Because technically, the Border Patrol management cannot have anything to do with the union, so they can say, we don't know what's going on. But all these press release statements and everything are actually coming from union agents.
Holy shit.
But Biden will not get rid of them because Biden doesn't want to appear anti-union or anti-law enforcement.
Oh, of course
But,
not.
we could ask the FBI agents how they feel about that because the FBI is not allowed to have a bargaining unit. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Like no, that is chilling. That is, and it's so perfectly speaks to, once again, like what we talk about a lot on this show, and generally the dynamic of like, oh yeah, the right knows exactly what they're doing. They've got all their judges in places. They've got all their, their unions in places. They got their people. They're weaving a web for you and a trap to fall into. The Democrats, no clue. Like no clue what web they're weaving. They're just weaving it around themselves, and they're tied up in their own knots. And like, it doesn't help that, that there's never been a commitment, even from the Democrats, to actual human rights, to actual fixing. Like, there's never been a commitment to human rights, and there's never been a commitment to fixing the broken immigration system, whether it's staffing the immigrant justice system properly, whether it's, whatever, developing a pathway to citizenship, any of that stuff. The last thing is Title 42, started by Trump, basically asylum seekers. You can, like, sorry, there's a pandemic that we don't actually believe in, but now we do, because if it's against any migrants, we believe in it. So Title 42 bars anyone from seeking asylum because of the extenuating circumstances of a global pandemic. Biden's continued it. That has not stopped. And it's only gotten, it's gotten a lot worse. I just want to, the Haitian migrants who've been deported en masse, not just from the folks under the bridge, but many different places, have been deported back to probably one of the most unstable countries in the world at the moment, which is Haiti. But this is actually just from this week, and in these times, a lot of the people who were refugees and asylum seekers who were outside in these tents, they're currently still in. This is an article called Mexico's Become a Ruthless Prison for Haitian Refugees. They're currently still in Mexico. And this is part of the Remain in Mexico policy, right? That is terrifying and is not helping anyone. I'm not going to totally read all these because they don't fit with exactly what I want, what we're basically saying. But essentially, under the Biden administration, Title 42's policy, initiated by Trump, has made thousands of Haitian migrants seeking asylum were simply expelled back to Haiti or southern Mexico. In addition to Title 42, the Biden administration is also restarting Trump's infamous Remain in Mexico program, whereby migrants must wait in Mexico until they're approved, and expanding it to include Haitians. So those seeking safety remain in limbo. Let me just get this straight. Migrant protection protocols, that's the Remain in Mexico policy, correct? The MPP and the Remain in Mexico, that's the same thing. Okay. Yeah. So like we just talked about, restarting MPP and then not doing anything about Title 42. Jenn, I've taken up enough of your time. Just your final chapter of the book, the one where you paint a picture of rainbows and lollipops and all the beautiful things. And what are the steps that we have to do in your mind to reform, to remake, to abolish, whatever your thoughts are when it comes to Border Patrol currently? We've gone over a lot of it, but what's your vision? What is your hope of hopes?
I started this journey of looking at my own actions as an agent and my own prejudices probably around 2015 I started doing it. And I finished my book recently, and in the end I come out on the side of abolition of the Border Patrol. And it's not that I believe, I understand the concept of open borders, but I don't believe in our society and the way we're structured, at least currently with climate change and everything, that we can have something like that. But I believe that the Border Patrol has shown and proven itself that is so corrupt that it cannot be reformed. You cannot reform this, is what most people say. And so I think that there needs to be a more humanitarian with a law enforcement side to it, kind of like the Bureau of Land Management or Park Police has. That's what I envision more for the Border Patrol.
Yeah.
And then also, as far as for migrants and asylum and refugees, we have to actually have an asylum system, because believe it or not, an asylum system that is actually open and works and checks people and encourages people to come and be inspected is a national security issue.
Yeah.
You cannot have national security without an open, robust, and effective asylum system. So what the Biden administration is doing right now is they are just digging a hole deeper, and the Republicans are watching them do that, because you have over a year's worth of Trump people from the Trump refugees sitting on the southern border waiting to come across. You have then this last year of the Biden administration, so you've got 2 years of people waiting to come across and then giving up and crossing illegally and being sent back and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's why you have such large numbers. You have a backlog of people because you have shut down the asylum system. What we are doing right now is shooting ourselves in the foot. We have to have a robust asylum system where we inspect everybody, and those who come across, we help them. We give them the best tools that we can to become productive citizens within our country. And the ones that come that we do records checks that we find are wanted for warrants or who are criminals, the very small percentage of, that's fine. We find out who they are and we deal with them appropriately according to our laws and international laws. We have to have an asylum system, period. Money has to be put into the asylum system, but I don't have hope for it because Biden and all these other Democrats take money from the same war machines, the companies that have done the war on drugs, that have done the war on terror, and now we're doing the war on the border and on the immigrants. Yes. So I don't have much hope for it.
Ooh, and on that note, look, I will sprinkle hope. I hope that in a future AOC presidency, Jenn Budd is an advisor to the national security, along with Andrea Flores. We've got a whole team. They're remaking immigration policy. And I want to hold that so I can sleep at night, even though no one should be sleeping safely or comfortably so long as all this shit is going on. But Jenn, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody follow Jenn on Twitter If we could throw up her lower third. What's your Twitter handle?
It's at Budd Jenn. It's backwards because somebody else owns at Jenn Budd. So, but I'm also on Facebook and Instagram.
And everybody stay tuned for I would love to have you back on when your book comes out, but I'm very, very excited for it. And thank you just so much for making time. I really appreciate it.
I thank you so much in doing such a long discussion on it. It's just really hard to get out the complexities of it. And I really, really appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Anytime. All right. Take good care, Jenn. And thank you guys all for sticking around and listening to that really in-depth conversation with someone who knows way more than I do about immigration policy. And I'm just like, yeah, I know y'all are here for it. So thank you. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you for your kind comments, your thoughtful comments. I promise you, future Francesca will be reading them. And once again, y'all, support this show and all the wonderful guests that we have on Bitchuation, patreon.com/Bitchuation room to become a patron and support these long, in-depth discussions, allowing us to bring folks on and to take the time to do what a lot of other places don't. And of course, I'm going to see you in Brooklyn. You're going to get your tickets, bitchuationroom.com. You can also get merch there. And with that, you guys, thus concludes another Sunday, another episode. Thank you so much to everyone who works on the show, Maximillien, Inhoff, to Paige, Oamek, my God, Paige, you're wonderful. To Alexandra Ornes on the other side of the comments. And we'll be here next week, Super Bowl Sunday, starting a little bit later because, Super Bowl Sunday or whatever. And whatever. I don't know. I'm supposed to care. Until then, guys, fight the power, fuck the patriarchy, and don't just bitch about it. Be about it. Later.